Hello everyone, this is Bob and Threadbare, and welcome back to Weaving Worlds. Since the last couple of videos I did were specifically about the fantasy genre, I've decided to even the score with today's video and talk about a science fiction setting issue. So, maybe you've noticed this, but science fiction works often feature single biome planets. No matter where you land on the surface, you'll always land in a jungle, or a swamp, or a desert, or the tundra. Or if a planet has a proper set of oceans and continents, we'll only see one small piece of it, and that piece will be extremely Earth-like in terms of atmosphere, gravity, and climate. First, let me say that this approach is entirely valid. Speculative fiction doesn't have to be realistic, it just has to resonate with its audience. However, this approach also neglects a lot of interesting concepts that are only available in science fiction. All of the following alien planet types are at the very least theoretically possible, and by using these concepts you can come up with environments and alien species that go far beyond anything Earth has ever produced. Number 1. Tidal Lock. A tidally locked planet is one that rotates and revolves around its sun at the same speed, which means that the same side always faces the sun, like how the moon is with Earth. Now, a planet like that would get too hot on the sunward side and too cold on the starward side to sustain life, but it is possible that the narrow strip of land between day and night, the twilight zone, could have liquid water and could sustain a kind of life. The biggest issue is that the atmosphere would be extremely turbulent, since the hot and cold zones would be constantly trying to equalize the different air pressures. Because of the narrow twilight zone and because of the air turbulence, it would probably make more sense for a spacefaring species to colonize a tidally locked planet rather than have the planet evolve intelligent life naturally. Either way, the constant hurricane-strength storms and the rapid temperature changes would make a tidally locked planet an interesting setting for an adventure story. Number 2. High Gravity. A high-gravity world is one with significantly more mass than Earth, and produces maybe around 1.5 gravities and above. Because of this gravity, anything that lives on it would be stocky, sturdy, and built low to the ground, since a relatively short fall can cause a surprising amount of damage. Picture something like a pygmy elephant, since a regular elephant would collapse under its own weight on a high-gravity world. It's also possible that a creature from a high-gravity world would have more than 4 limbs, since stability is another important asset. Flying creatures would be smaller and less common, since while the atmospheric pressure would be higher, it probably wouldn't make up for the extra effort it takes to fly. Number 3. Low Gravity. Take everything I just said about the high-gravity world and reverse it. Life forms on a low-gravity world are more likely to grow tall since they have less to fear from falling over, and they would be relatively light and fragile since they don't have to invest energy on supporting their own weight. You should also expect to see more creatures that use flying, gliding, and jumping to get around, but with the low atmospheric pressure you might not see animals like albatrosses that can stay aloft for days at a time. For the same reason, the wind currents would likely be weaker, especially at high altitudes. Number 4. Oceanic. The surface of the Earth is approximately 70% water and 30% land, and this percentage has varied over time thanks to volcanic eruptions, ice ages, and tectonic plate shifts. It is therefore quite plausible that an oceanic world with over 90% water coverage could exist somewhere in the universe. Such a world would likely have a higher concentration of water vapor in the atmosphere, which would mean more cloud cover, more precipitation, and more storms. Sapiens would be less likely to develop on an oceanic world, however, since fire played an important role in human development, and it's almost impossible to set fires underwater. Land creatures in general could certainly exist, depending on just how much land there is, but a higher percentage of the land species would probably have a life cycle that involves spending time in the water. Number 5. Arid. If land were to take up a higher percentage of a planet's surface, there's a good chance that a lot of that land would be dry and dead. After all, the Earth only has 30% land coverage, and vast stretches of that land are barren or nearly barren deserts and wastelands. Storms and precipitation would be rarer, since water vapor would be less concentrated in the atmosphere, and for that matter, there might be less oxygen in the atmosphere since the majority of Earth's oxygen comes from oceanic plants and algae. So while an arid world will have plenty of land to build on, overall it would be much less hospitable to life. Number 6. Concentrated heavy metals. According to what we currently know about stars and chemical elements, the only source of elements heavier than iron is supernovas. That's why these elements tend to be much less common, and certain heavy elements like mercury and lead can kill humans if they build up in high enough concentrations. This rarity is also because heavy elements are more likely to be drawn towards the planetary core, leaving only trace amounts on the crust. However, a planet could quite easily have a higher concentration of heavy metals in the crust than Earth does, and if life developed on such a planet, then it would very likely find ways to metabolize and use these elements instead of dying from overexposure. Such organisms might have a metallic sheen to their skin or shells, or they might taste metallic when eaten. And they could have abilities that Earth life never developed thanks to the unique properties that the heavy elements offer. Number 7. Barren. A barren world is one where life simply doesn't exist. Maybe it did in the past, like Mars, potentially, or maybe it never could exist there, like Mercury or the Moon. There are 1,000 reasons life might not appear on a planet, but a barren world can still be part of your setting, since spacefaring species might be able to set up self-contained colonies on barren rocks and then mine them for valuable metals, or use them as testing grounds for dangerous projects. Number 8. Non-Photosynthetic Oxygen. The world of Arrakis in Frank Herbert's Dune series has almost no plant life and zero surface water. However, the planet still has a breathable atmosphere because part of the sandworm's life cycle involves producing a vast amount of oxygen. So when I talk about non-photosynthetic oxygen, what I mean is that the local lifeforms have gone a completely different direction from Earth, but have still wound up creating a world that humans would consider habitable. So you could have a desert planet that can still sustain life, a dark planet or a gas giant moon that gets its energy from magnetic radiation or geothermal heat, or a rogue planet that has life forms that can get energy from close approaches to stars, but otherwise spends millions of years in hibernation. Number 9. Young. A young planet is one that hasn't gone through as much as the present-day Earth has. And since Earth is 4.5 billion years old, that opens a pretty wide spectrum of possibilities. Single-cell lifeforms have been around for about 4 billion years, and photosynthesis began around 500 million years after that. The high oxygen atmosphere we breathe today first appeared around 2.4 billion years ago, and pretty much any time after that, aliens could have colonized Earth and harvested single-cell organisms for food. A young but habitable planet would most likely have more volcanic activity thanks to a thinner crust, more asteroid impacts thanks to a more cluttered solar system, and yet also fewer biological dangers thanks to a less diverse biosphere that doesn't know what to do with complex life forms. Number 10. Old. An old planet would be one that's nearing the end of its life-bearing period. The sun could be growing too large and push the planet out of the Goldilocks zone. The molten core could have frozen in place and turned off the magnetosphere, and now the atmosphere is blowing away in the solar wind. Or maybe a series of disasters like volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and nuclear wars have changed the environment beyond the ability of life to adapt. Or if life itself hasn't died out, then there has been a recent mass extinction event. The main idea is that the planet can still support life, but its days of doing so are numbered. For physical features, an older planet would have fewer volcanoes and shorter mountain ranges, because the tectonic plates are thicker and don't move around as much, or possibly not at all. Number 11. Irradiated. There is a hypothesis that the reason intelligent life appeared on Earth and nowhere else that we've found is because Earth has an unusually high concentration of radioactive elements in the crust, and the background radiation it produced has accelerated mutation. This concentration is because of the Moon, whose gravity has kept these elements from sinking all the way into the mantle. However, it's also possible that other planets may experience more radiation, either from having a weaker magnetosphere to protect against solar radiation, or an even higher concentration of radioactive elements in the crust. Either way, an irradiated planet would most likely have a higher rate of cancer and other harmful mutations, but also a greater amount of biodiversity relative to the planet's age. Number 12. Toxic. Every breath you take in right now is full of trace amounts of human and animal dander, mold spores, plant pollens, and industrial pollutants. You aren't noticing any of this because your body is designed to filter out these foreign particles and either ignore them or metabolize them. Of course, you may be allergic to one or more of these airborne particles, but even so, allergens are the exception compared to the vast number of foreign particles and molecules that your body takes in stride. However, life on a foreign world may produce particles that your body can't handle, and so just by standing on the surface, you could experience a drug trip, death by poisoning, or death by an allergic reaction. That's what it means for a planet to be toxic. Exposure to the local life forms can kill you in a variety of unpleasant ways, even though the native life and possibly other aliens will do just fine. Number 13. Artificial. Ringworld is a series of stories about an artificial ring that orbits a star and spins just fast enough to produce simulated gravity for all of its occupants. Various authors have discussed the possibility of a massive colony ship that can travel between two stars, or else colony stations that can maintain a stable orbit in the Lagrangian points near the Earth or the Moon. Still other authors have been even more ambitious and come up with the idea of a Dyson sphere, a megastructure that could theoretically enclose a star and thus absorb most of the energy it generates. Now, the scale of such a construction would be, well, astronomical. But fortunately, you don't have to worry about the scale or the cost, because you are an author creating a setting. Planets in science fiction can be a whole lot more than just one biome, and they don't even have to be Earth-like to have life and a breathable atmosphere. So take advantage of the variety that the genre offers you and add in locations like ancient dying worlds, high-gravity worlds, toxic worlds, dry worlds, or even a combination of all of the above. Go nuts! After all, what's stopping you? Thanks for joining me again for today's journey into Weaving Worlds. Please like, share, and subscribe because that raises my visibility here on YouTube. Check out my other stuff if you have some time, support me on Patreon if you have some money, and I hope I'll see you again for the next video.